Jackalope Juni in the Race. A Tall Tale of We the Immortals by Luke Warfield. "That ain't nothing but goose gaw," said Cooter Palfrey, flinging back his cup of fire water and swallowing it with a decided squelch. He motioned to the barmaid for a top-off. Old Bale eyed Cooter measured-like. He had seen things in this life, and Coot was young and just getting on as a trapper. The boy had much to learn about the world yon. By their faces, several of the onlookers harbored these self-same sentiments. "It ain't goose gaw," said Old Bale. "I seent him with mine own eyes. Short as a melon head and lithe as a wampus cat, old man Pea-pod. Wore nothing but croaker sack, even for boots. Lived up yon Blunt Mountain in a little hermitage there. Yer can still go and see its ruins if yer have the mind and persistence to look. Yer can see where he used to talk ter the animals and tend his garden. Furnished muscadine as large as a feller's fist. Turnips as long as your'n arm. Growed himself taters bigger'n my own head, I reckon. Just like the old days, afore humans come round the Aussies. Old man Peapod, he warn't one of them holy folk neither, nor any kind of grubrood. Ain't no magic in his blood, no sir. Learnt him the tongue of beasts by just sittin' with 'em, and they taught him the secrets of the soil. That's how he come ter work it like that. Even tamed himself a golden bear and rode it about as a jumint." Cooter sneered at this and quaffed more of the firewater. The onlookers giggled amongst themselves. "You gents heed Mr. Bale now," said the barmaid, who everyone knew as Miss Florinda, owner and operator of the saloon. "Mr. Bale has seen his fair share of wonders, and I have never known him to be a weaver of tall tales." Old Bale smiled at Cooter, relishing in the endorsement. The youth grimaced into his cup as if, at her speaking, all of his teeth had suddenly and mysteriously come undone. "You sure do talk pretty, Miss Florinda," said one of the onlookers. She thanked the man and turned and issued Old Bale a wink and topped off his beer. Florinda was as graceful as she was shrewd, and as shrewd as she was mighty fine to look at, too. Hers was a kind of genteel comeliness, though one beset by nameless troubles which afforded her a meanness equivalent when the need arose for its summoning. Old Bale supposed one had to be as much to run an enterprise such as this, to bring the patrons in and keep them coming back, all while ensuring they played nice-like during their stay. Florinda wore a big Gautier pistol on the left hip of her skirt, twist-wise for all to see and contemplate. A repeating rifle slept under the countertop when reinforcements were necessary. Likely there were such like arms stowed in other places, both on the person and about the saloon, but Old Bale knew not their fashion or positioning. The saloon was a large tent space, the big top kind, wide enough and high enough for a proper jamboree when the season called for it, and the season called for it every Saturday night from spring to fall, and always proved a wild time for those in attendance. Florinda's attracted the hardest, wiliest, meanest, queerest, and smelliest itinerants west of the Grand Mountains. All races, places, creeds, and breeds. All come to gander, gamble, gabble, gobble, or grumble. Even Florinda herself was some type of character, Old Bale knew, though she kept the details of that shadowy backstory a secret to all who met her. Old Bale had never heard her speak of it, and the patrons made a game of weaving their own yarns about how and why a lady like that come to a place like this. A tapping arose at the far end of the bar, and Florinda whirred away like an actress taking stage cues at some big lighted variety show, the sort patrons of this here saloon might frequent just as often. "Be right with you, gents," she said. "You just make yourselves comfortable and I'll pour you some of this here firewater. Get your cups out. Yes, that's good. Here you are." "I got me one better," said Dizzy Lagoon, a local prospector and regular patron of the saloon. Her voice filled the vacuum produced by Florinda's departure, a timbre soused with the rapacious fanaticism of a trembler proselyte set upon those of a less civilized caste. Like Cooter Palfrey, Dizzy was fledgling to the trade of pick and pan, but the lessons of Old Bale's wilderness lore hadn't been lost on her as it had on the trapper. No, Dizzy was a believer, and Old Bale liked believers. There was a feller come from my neck o' the woods long ago. My papaw knowed him and told us youngers the tale. Tough as a blue ox this feller was, I reckon. Fashioned himself a coal miner for a time. Broke door with his bare fists, just lopped it clean off the tunnel wall like a pile driver done stone. I tink your head's been pile driv there, Diz, said one bedraggled Tollander. Huge guffaws burst forth among the onlookers in a gaggle of epileptic shaking, both raucous and soundless. Dizzy mocked the man's accent with walled eyes and an underhanded scratching motion as if miming some kind of queer ape, and the insult only increased the throng's stridency, this time in the opposite direction. Anyway, Dizzy Lagoon said with great emphasis, looking sidelong at the Tollander, as I was saying, there was a saloon back east, the Horsefly Trap I reckoned it was called, and every week there management put up arm wrestling competitions for cash money. 50 plews to the crown champion, I shit you not. Bello Armstrong, that's the feller's name my papaw told us about. Well, he just plumb won all of 'em and took that prize money without anyone questioning whether or not he deserved it. Ain't nobody nowhere could match up to old Bello, as sure as perdition's cold. Well, one night, after word got around of old Bello's undefeated streak, this rich plantation feller, you're no one o' them gentleman types, come in with a Yeti slave, and he bets old Bello can't beat his chattel in no arm wrestling match, and all that talk about the champ warn't nothing but bona fide compost. Even put up 200 plews in crisp greenleaf just to verify his confidence in the matter. Bello, well, he ain't never backed down from nobody, so he agreed to the match right away, to be held at that very moment. A real prize fight, you might say. Well, the two o' them, they squared up at the table and locked arms, and the whole room falled silent with anticipation. This was human versus Yeti, man versus beast, a clash of the races, civilization against the wild. So what happened? Said Old Bale, watching Dizzy over the rim of his tumbler. What happened was something ain't nobody expected. See, them two opponents gave it everything they had, but no matter how hard either of them pushed, ain't nobody moved anybody any which way. Nary an inch, nary less. No, them two were stuck in a stalemate right there at the starting position, elbow to elbow, hand in hand, like they was in some kind of strange dare to see who could let go first. Then old Bello, well, he let out the God's damnedest yell you ever done heard. Loud enough to crack stones, said my papaw. Then, with a great heave, he flunged that big old skunk ape down and done it so hard that the Yeti smashed through the floor and cut a crater in the ground and formed Lake Stowe at the same time. The bar detonated yet again in a nimbus of wild fits of laughter and jeering. Whoops and hollers. Someone in the back was clapping. Another smacked a thigh. Even Cooter Palfrey gave a wry chuckle this time, shaking his head as if embarrassed by having any reaction at all. Old Bale liked the prospector's yarn. It certainly upped his own ante, and he watched Dizzy Lagoon raise her mug to the throng in a manner that interpreted all excitations as avowals of good opinion. Not bad, young'un, said Old Bale. Not bad at all. That ain't nothin', came a new voice suddenly, stopping Dizzy mid-sip and the onlookers mid-cahoots. Old Bale eyed the newcomer with surprise. The fellow had taken up residence to the old man's immediate right, upon the plat of counter space nearest the tent flaps. The faint pong of hoglots tarried about this individual like a mean, and the stranger was dressed in befilthed work clothes not unlike a practitioner of the occupation. The stranger's face was huge and furred with thick beardage clean-shaven at the neck. An equally enormous pair of hairy hands cupped about both sides of his tumbler as if he were some blind troll sitting in quiet supplication. A tattered derby, millinered for a sarzan, rested on the man's left knee, a pronounced widow's peak arching up and down the veiny pate made visible in the article's absence. I got one that beats all, said the stranger. That's so, said Old Bale, eyeing the man. What makes ye so sure? 'Cause this one ain't no yarn. Dizzy Lagoon scoffed and muttered something under her breath. Giggles and murmurs gibbered hither and thither. Y'all ever heard of Jackalope Juni Jager? Not that I reckon, Old Bale said. Heads waggled in further confirmation of this. Well, I'll tell ye of her. In a race she runned in them early days, when our kind first come to the Western Theater. Mind y'all, this was before the Crusades and all that,
when us and the Grooves were still feeling each other out."
"And up," said Dizzy Lagoon. Howls poured forth. The stranger grinned with quietude, tipping an invisible hat brim dizzy-wise. She did not return the gesture. The stranger went on.
"Say what ye might, young blood, but this tale's about the greatness of our kind, and you ain't gonna find one truer. See, back then, them Grooves didn't know what to make of the Saorians. We was all just testing each other out. One day, both our groups organized a friendly race in the spirit of sportsmanship. Now, Jackalope, she was the fastest scout in the Corps, so naturally she done got put up for the event. Jackalope was so fast, they said a feller could be looking right at her, blink, and she'd be gone. Runned off so quick it was like she just disappeared. That's how she got her name. She could run down a jackalope and catch it by the horns, and ain't nothing faster than a jackalope, 'cept maybe the great Warwind himself. Now, the race was set for first light on the first day of the week, on Lake Osimi's western beach. Jackalope, she come dressed in her buckskins as usual, but nary slippers or boots, as she believed they'd only slow her down like.
"Liable to wear her out, though," said Old Bale. "Them sharp rocks and roots and sich."
"Well, that's what she done did,"
the stranger continued, as if the matter was, in fact, a matter of fact, and would remain so in perpetuity.
"As for her opponent, the Grooves put up a big buck by the sign of Indo-Wailu, a black-winged, red-haired specimen, with eyes so damned blue cold they'd chase perdition away. Indo-Wailu, the Osimi said, was the fastest flyer among their kind, bar none."
"I thought this was a foot race," interrupted the Tullander, looking dubious as ever.
"It was, at first. But see, old Jackalope upped the stakes that fateful morn, told them Grooves to put her up against their best flyer, and if she couldn't beat that mangy buzzard in a foot race to the top of Ragged Mountain, him flying while she running, why, the Saorians would plumb up and leave the Western Theater for good. Course, this made her commanding officer pretty mad, seeing how Jackalope ain't had the authority to tender such like. But them Grooves took her up on the bet, and so ter go back on her word would have meant death upon all our folk in attendance."
The gaggle stirred right then, exchanging anxious glances, though speaking not a word in the act. Old Bale followed suit, issuing not so much as a breath. All concentration was awarded to the stranger and his queer tale, which, by his own allegation, was a reality truer than the existence of the gods.
"So Jackalope sets down her possibles, and sets herself up cozy-like alongside that big buck she was set to race. Then the colonel of Juni's regiment, I forget the name, raised up her lock pistol and said,
'At the sound of the shot, begin. First to reach Ragged Mountain's peak is declared winner in the sight of all, angel and human.'
Brethren, I tell ye, the tension was so thick in that hour, it could have been bottled and sold at the store. Both sides wanted to see their champion victorious, but since Jackalope done made that crazy bet, her loss would have meant certain death for them Saorians, seeing as how we ain't had the weapons to stand up to her Groo magic yet. For the Saorians, 'twas win or die. Then the shot came. Kerpow! The Groo buck took to the sky, and Jackalope broke out in a sprint for the mountain, and the force of her kick was so great, it stirred up the first and only Dust Bowl right there in Osimi land."
Snickers and whispers from the throng. The corner of Old Bale's mouth ticked up and settled.
Now that Groo flew hard and fast, wings a-pumping, hair a-whipping in the wind, and at first it took all the mustard old Jackalope could summon just to keep that rascal in sight. But that's the thing about old Jackalope, see? The bigger the challenge, the more determined she was, and the more determined she was, the faster she up and runned. Soon she was outpacing that flying buzzard, scrambling up the mountain so fast, when she reached the finish line, her opponent was just passing overhead. At that moment, Jackalope leaped into the sky and done up and plucked a feather from his wings just to let him know she'd not been defeated. "Horse manure," said Cooter Palfrey, pounding the bar top. "Ain't no way no human runned that fast, and ain't no way she jumped that high." "Only it did happen, young blood," said the stranger in a tone of utmost quietude. The race was declared a tie, I reckon, and it said the power of that leap was so great, the top of a ragged mountain planed flat as a butte, and thus was renamed Blunt Mountain forevermore. Oh, old Jackalope did it. The tale is real and true, corroborated by many eyewitnesses.
Unless I see the feather with my own eyes, I'll not believe it, said Cooter.
You mean this one, young blood?
The stranger held up a curious thing that drew all in attendance to a gasp. Between his fingers, the stranger flourished a single black feather, a flight extremity, no doubt, sleek and oily, its length greater than any man's forearm and wider than the stranger's own palm, pinky to thumb. The specimen was far too big to belong to any ostrix, or any other bird type for that matter, and the room observed the pinion with bemused wonderment. The exhibit certainly looked angrew, but was it indeed the feather of the stranger's tail?
Ain't no way that's a grue feather, said Cooter, though without any conviction in his words. And sides, even if it be, how can we know that's the feather she done plucked from that buck she raced? Because old Juni was my great-great-great-grandam, and this here heirloom's been passed down in my family for 5 generations now. Yes, sir, this here's the feather of note, and proof of my tale. But that's not the only thing I inherited from old Jackalope, I reckon.
What you mean? Said Dizzy, her words tinctured with curiosity now. But the stranger merely placed a finger over his lips and drained the rest of his tumbler without further issuance. The gaggle sneered at the man's non-answer and returned to talking amongst themselves, debating whether or not this stranger's yarn was true, or if the fellow was indeed some kind of grifter as they had suspected. Suddenly, a shout arose. Cooter! And the youth was on his feet and pointing with hysterical gibbers in the stranger's direction. Old Bale spun about, afeared by what terrible thing awaited him there. But when his mind cleared and his eyes fixed, he found the stranger was gone, an empty tumbler all that marked the man's former presence among them. He was just there, stammered Cooter. I was looking right at him. I ain't done but blinked, and I reckon I ain't even turned my head. It was like he just disappeared. This, of course, stirred up quite a fit of laughter, followed by arguments over whether or not Cooter had imbibed himself too much firewater this night. However, old Bale watched thoughtfully. He understood the stranger's meaning now. Yes, he understood it very well. Old Bale grinned and sipped from his tumbler, thinking on all the wonders of the world.